The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. Just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF.
And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this next session of the Minority Health Film Festival. This is Talking Men's Health, and we want to thank our sponsors, Rogers Behavioral Health and the United Way. My name is Pastor Walter Lanier. I'm the pastor of the Progressive Baptist Church of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Also serve on the Milwaukee County Mental Health Board and the founder of an organization called Miracle, Mental Illness Raising Awareness with church, congregation, and community leaders everywhere. But my task here today is to facilitate this marvelous discussion that we are going to have, talking men's emotional health, particularly from a multicultural and diverse framework or context. So I am going to introduce our panelists for this evening, for this afternoon, I should say, and we will jump in and get started. Again, we are excited about what we have going on here today, and to have the diversity of men here with us to talk about men's emotional health. And so I want to introduce each. I'm going to give a brief introduction of all so we can see who we have with us on the panel. And then I will start out with my first question. My first panelist is Pardeep Singh Kalika. Pardeep is the executive director of the Zeidler Group and Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. He's the founder of Serve to Unite, published author of The Gift of Our Wounds, a clinician specializing in utilizing trauma-informed approach to treat survivors and perpetrators of assault, abuse, and acts of violence. So welcome with us, Pardeep. Second is, and then second with us is Corey Fells, the filmmaker, 20M. He's gonna have to tell me how to say that. M times N, M to the M. He will let us know.
Men.
Thank you, sir. Corey Fells, 27 years of age, is a filmmaker and a photographer from the north side of Milwaukee. Through his creative work, he looks to tell untold stories of Black and brown youth in the city of Milwaukee. His work includes 20 Men, a documentary film series focused on men's mental wellness in communities of color, and the 100 Women Project, a photo series highlighting millennial women of color in Milwaukee. So welcome, Corey. Next, we have Kevin Kreider, subject of the film The Ugly Model. Hey, Kevin, born in Seoul and adopted at the age of 3 to a German-Irish family in Philadelphia. Kevin Tajan Kreider recalls being bullied for his lanky figure, Asian heritage, and always being the token Asian guy at a young age, which has been his fuel and motivation for many years. In 2014, the stress and nonstop nature of his career in the entertainment industry took a toll on him, and he was diagnosed with alopecia, an autoimmune disease that attacks the hair follicles. In 2 weeks, he lost not only a majority of his hair, but also his modeling career. He currently resides in Los Angeles. He's made his way here to Milwaukee. I'm gonna give a little secret. He's experienced a little jet lag, but he's gonna be marvelous for us and with us. He finds he can use all his strengths in fitness, well-being, modeling, motivational speaking, content creation, and entertainment with a mission to change the perceptions of Asian men worldwide. Welcome, Kevin. Glad to have you with us. Next is Dr. Kazee. I'm gonna go to Matt next. Matthew Lewis, clinical coordinator at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He's born in Milwaukee as a clinical coordinator at the Medical College's Inclusion Clinic. Previously, he worked as the 414 All-Program Coordinator for the Diverse and Resilient team. Identifying heavily as a poet, playwright, and a community advocate, he earned a Bachelor of Arts in English with a creating writing emphasis from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, with a certificate in gender and women's studies. Hey, Matthew, good to have you with us. Dr. Kazee Mcqueen, medical director, Rogers Behavioral Health, He's a board certified adult forensic psychiatrist who specializes in the treatment of major mental illness and addiction. He serves as a medical director of Rogers Behavioral Health in West Allis, which includes medical oversight of all services provided at the hospital campus, and as the medical director of the Harrington Center for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery, which provides adult residential care. Gentlemen, it is great to have you with us. Dr. Kazee, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and jump right in. You all have a great diversity of backgrounds for this discussion about men's mental and emotional health. And I'm going to start with the end in mind. And I know that you all have deep experience in this subject. When you think about mental health and men and emotional wellness, and if you only had one key thing that you want our listeners, our people who are attending to walk away from this session with, what would that one thing be? And I'm going to start with Pardeep.
Thank you, Pastor Lanier, and thank you for everyone tuning in out there. And it's an honor to be on with Matthew, Dr. Mcqueen, Kevin, Corey, yourself, Pastor Lanier, and all the work that you have done over the years. I think just thinking about that and thinking about what we want to kind of walk away with, I thought about courage right away. And I think that oftentimes when we think about mental health issues, there's a stigma that's attached or has historically been attached to people who go and proactively get mental health treatment, especially the stigma. I mean, and I think the stigma is really, as far as like men's mental health is especially looming and intimidating. So oftentimes I think just being courageous, and really building a comprehensive sort of mental health approach around well-being. That's kind of what jumped out at me right away.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Courage. So we'll put that down as one. Let's next go to Corey. What is a key takeaway, a critical thing that you would want people to know about the journey?
To be very honest, being a young Black man in Milwaukee, and from the North Side, there's some times where your mental health is being tested. Not sometimes, most of the time. And there's also the stigma of not being able to actually get the actual help that you need. And that's weird, that's not needed or anything like that. It's definitely needed. I just left the military, me being in the Army for 8 years, and then also just me being on the North Side of Milwaukee. My mental health has been tested every single day strongly for 8 years. So my project has definitely helped me out with understanding that a lot of people think that they have it down pack, and some others actually do, and some that don't. Just walking away knowing that it's okay not to be okay. That's pretty much what I want everyone to walk away with.
Appreciate you, Corey. Thank you, and thank you for your service also. Let's go next to Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I think the one big takeaway I want people to walk away with is to realize that they're not alone in this. And the way that I found out I wasn't alone in this is that when people spoke or people wanted to help me, I looked for what we had in common in their experience. Because obviously, you see all the people here, we're from different backgrounds and even color. And so if I just look for, oh, well, this guy's not Asian, then I'm not going to feel like I can get help. And also too, like the feelings of depression or mental health are all the same. It's just that we all experience it differently. And so just knowing that you're not alone in being afraid to speak up about your real feelings or being seen a certain way or being insecure or feeling inferior to other people or fear, whatever it is, you're not alone in it. And there's other people out there who can help you.
Thank you, Kevin. Do you prefer Matthew or Matt?
Matthew.
Matthew, good.
Please.
All right. Yep.
Mm-hmm. I think the one thing I want folks to take away from this conversation is that, like, the journey to emotional wellness, if that is the end destination, is not a linear one. That it's a constant process of re-engaging emotions as they appear. And that's okay to not be mad at yourself when you thought you reached a destination and something returns for you to deal with again, and maybe the tools don't work the same. And I shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown, like she like named it like the time traveling emotions thing. So I take that with me, and I would really like if people take anything away from the things I have to offer today, that would be it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And Dr. Kazee.
Thank you, Pastor Lanier, and I want to thank the panelists as well as the listeners who have joined us. And I like the idea of starting from the end. I think it gives it kind of emphasizes some important message that we need to get across to people. And one message I have for listeners is to be aware of their emotions and behavior and listen to people around you, because sometimes those are the people who can see the change before you can see it for yourself. And it's okay to be vulnerable. And please seek help or support or treatment if it is necessary, because we've seen people who seek support and guidance in early stages tend to have better outcomes.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate that. So let's go ahead and jump in with the next question. And just if you raise your hand, and then I'll call on you if you want to respond. We'll catch everybody. So what do you think are the most significant barriers for men of color in regards to mental health and emotional health? What are the most significant barriers? Go ahead. We'll start with Corey.
One of the most significant barriers would be that sometimes people think that the help is not out there. A lot of people think that therapists are buku amount of money, and honestly, it could be. It's subjective on the person. However, there are ways of being able to circumvent that. My sister lives in New York, so obviously you just have to be rich to be poor out there. But her being able to reach out to this organization that pretty much funded her first 5 sessions with a therapist helped out immensely during these times. Currently, I'm working on I have a program where I'm providing group therapy for free for only Black people, Black women, Black LGBTQ people, and also lastly Black men. And hopefully we're able to find a concept and find resources to be able to have this be an ongoing thing, because post-pandemic and post everything, honestly, mental health is going to have to be put in the forefront. There's actual physical damages, but the mental damage is what's going to really going to show improve throughout the years in the next few decades. So, yeah.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate that. I'm going to go to Pardeep, and then I'll go to Kevin. I do want to just draw that last thing you said. All of that was relevant, Corey, but you also said for the next few decades. That's really deep, that will have consequences that will carry forward for years to mental and emotional health. Pardeep, and then Kevin.
Yeah, and I agree with Corey that I think this is going to be this is going to be a long-term commitment that we have to make as a society to really build a culture that is going to be one that's going to get away from histories of trauma to histories of healing. And that's a shift that we have to make ourselves within our families, our friends, and systemically. So it's a cultural shift for sure. I want to talk about as far as like Matthew and just the challenges sometimes, and you hit on it, right? Like it's like the linear living that we are kind of just embroiled in, and we don't know sometimes. A lot of times we validate and we value in this country the thinking mind. And so we think, and we overthink. We don't understand how connected our bodies are. We don't understand if we're not engaging in taking care of all of us, that we're not going to be able to take care of our minds, and we're not going to be able to take care of our families. But we do get into a linear living of, I'm just going to 9 to 5 it. And I don't say everybody's a 9 to 5er, but oftentimes we have a routine. And then you ask somebody, well, when did you take care of yourself in that routine? When did you exercise in that routine? When did you go and address your mental health in that routine? and it's not really built into our it's not built into our educational systems. It's not built into other in the corporate culture. What is built in is you're of value because you're a student, a good student, and you're smart. You're of value because you're a good corporate employee. But we're not thinking about the whole person, and that's over time, that's sort of a spiritual crisis that somebody has, and once they get to it, it might be a bit too late. It's never too late, but they might themselves think it's too late, and I'm not worth going out and getting mental health. So I think part of the challenge is just really not knowing that they need it.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Pardeep. That made me think, and we'll go to Kevin. There's an article I came across. It was out of Canada. It's about maybe a year and a half old, and the title of it is that self-care is not enough. Community care is what's needed. Self-care is not enough. Community care is what's needed. And the idea is that if you're trying to take care of self in a community that does not honor that and respect that and nurture that, it can be toxic because you're kind of doing stuff that's counter to the community. So I use that a lot when I try to share.
Hi. So I actually think the biggest barrier to mental health is actually the stigmatism around mental health more than anything. I believe there's actually everything, every resource, every group, every problem, there's a solution to it out there. It's just the stigmatism that comes with, hey, I have mental health problems, or whatever you want to label it, or make it fluffy for you to make you understand that it's just something that's in here in between your two ears. That's the problem. It's not everything else. And so I think that's something that as a group, as people, as a society, we really need to start destigmatizing and making it more normalized. Because I mean, I'm just speaking just based off of being Asian, but there's billions of Asian people who don't believe in mental health because in Asia, they believe it's something we made up. And it's something that, by the way, there's a huge suicide rate in Asia, which is the ironic part. They're like, no, mental health doesn't exist. Pfft, they're willing to kill themselves and off themselves from depression and anxieties and social pressures, which is all tied into mental health. And so there's this idea that you don't need help. You can just do it yourself. Like, I'll just trudge along, right? And it's just, that's not healthy either. And so then your willpower gives up and you end up deteriorating, and who knows what happens afterwards. I'm not going to tell people what happens, but for me, it was a very lonely and depressing route. And if mental health wasn't stigmatized the way it was, I probably would have gone to seek help sooner, because I always thought, well, those are for losers, or those are for people who really have problems. And this whole time I could have benefited from it. So I think it has to do with people like us, or people who are attending this seminar or this talk to people who are going through mental health issues, and to actually share your experience and to normalize it and not make them feel like it's something that's abnormal. So I think that's actually the biggest barrier.
Go ahead, Dr. Kazee.
Kevin, thank you for bringing the issue of stigma. I think that's so important. I mean, we talk about that so often that people refuse to seek help because of the stigma mental illness carries. And this gets amplified in men and in men of color. And it's really important to look at it as a barrier, but also look at reasons why it has become a huge barrier. In my opinion, it starts from your upbringing, where you don't have role models who exactly tell you how to deal with a crisis or a conflict that you may have. So you never learn that. You never learn about talking about emotions openly. A lot of times I've heard when I've treated people that emotional problems or depression is seen as a sign of weakness, and that prevents people from seeking help or treatment. And then men are seen as the head of the household who has to provide for the family. And if you seek treatment, then you show that you are not strong enough in the face of adversity. So there are a whole host of reasons why we refuse to acknowledge the problem we have. And that kind of only complicates the matter because you never seek help that you need. And by the time you seek help, it has gotten to a point that it has become really bad. So that's what I think, recognizing the barriers and recognizing stigma and the reasons why we reach that stage is really important. You're on mute, Pastor.
I know. I'm gonna just keep it off. Come to Matthew last. I just want to throw a little sliver in there. As a leader of a community, as a pastor, people share what's going on. If somebody has cancer, they'll know somebody else that has cancer. They'll talk about it. If somebody has diabetes, they'll identify with somebody else has had diabetes, and they can access to resources. Somebody tears a ligament in their knee, they'll remember so-and-so had a cast on, and so they can identify resources. And that's part of that community. But if the stigma doesn't allow us to say that, we can't access the resources that are right there inside our community. And so that's just another piece I want to lift up, because there's stigma inside faith communities as well. Go ahead. Last but not least, Matthew, you want to share about barriers for men of color?
Yeah, I echo a lot of the things that everyone has said thus far. Especially around stigma. I think for me, sometimes it's a combination of stigma and an inaccessible system or inaccessible resources for mental health services. Like, people get in there who maybe have never interacted with, traditional like healthcare systems. And I don't know that, there's an understanding for like someone coming from like the Black community to like a system that's not necessarily designed with like Black people in mind. And I think sometimes, especially for Black men, not the stigma of like not wanting to be seen as weak, but also wanting to be believed in like the feelings that you feel. And when you go to someone who may not understand the community you come from, the language you use to describe how you feel, and instead saying, no, this is what it is, I just think that can be a big turnoff for someone looking to heal. It's like, well, no, I don't feel good. That makes me feel worse. So I just think inaccessible systems are a huge problem for men, especially men of color.
Go ahead, Dr. Kazee.
Thank you, Matthew. I think that's really crucial. I think the cultural sensitivity to men of color and to recognize their unique needs is really important. A lot of people don't have that, what we call as cultural competence, where every culture is different and unique, and your backgrounds, how you present, how you relay your problems are so unique and different. And that's why I think, as providers, as a clinician, as a physician myself, I try to be sensitive to the unique nature of the problems people present. And not just that, there's a lot of, sometimes initially it comes off as resistance, and resistance can be misinterpreted as not willing to seek treatment. So you gotta, as a provider or as a physician or as a counselor, you gotta break through that resistance. You got to develop the trust with that person, and then you have a better chance and a higher likelihood of you being helpful to them in navigating through their problems.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Pardeep next, and I just want to draw a thread, Dr. Kazee, when you mentioned helping them to navigate that resistance. I see that as in part touching Matthew's thread, because that means I'm attending to you, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you. Even if I don't understand, I take the professional responsibility to try to meet you where you are. And so that I appreciate that. Pardeep, go ahead. You had a comment.
Yeah, just as far as the wisdom on this panel, as far as everyone, and just building off of stigma, inaccessible systems, inaccessible services, and I think there's also not the breadth of. I mean, this is a very. I mean, it's an old profession. It's an old. I mean, it goes back to people taking care of each other and just kind of knowing what is happening. But the breadth of knowledge, especially around communities of color, is very much in its infancy. In 1980 was the first time the DSM the Diagnostic Statistical Manual allowed somebody to diagnose somebody with a PTSD disorder. Before that, you weren't even able to do that. They knew about trauma, but oftentimes there was this hyper sort of masculine culture of you were just soft. If you went to war and you couldn't handle it, you were just soft. And even at that time in 1980, when they came out with the DSM-3 and they started to diagnose PTSD disorders, you yourself had to go through something to be diagnosed it. Now it has evolved even just in the last few years to say, okay, it doesn't need to be you. You could have witnessed something. You could have heard about something. You could have seen something on TV of somebody that you identified with, and you could be diagnosed with PTSD. So what you're seeing is a diagnosis going from a very individualistic model to a very communal model. And now we think about what we're inundated with, the information and just the feelings of being just burdened by it and all of that stuff. Even to think about Dr. Joy DeGruy's study on generational trauma. A lot of people, when that first came out, people didn't take it seriously. They just thought she was, and she was talking about ancestral wounds. She was talking about that being passed down generation after generation. A lot of people within the medical community were like, well, how do we quantify that? How do we, and now almost everyone accepts that that's the reality. And I think going forward, we're going to understand just how deep some of those generational wounds are. And I think that we're figuring out right now, as COVID-19 is causing us to sit still and say, hey, here's a society where people's pain is meeting people's anxieties. And here's what happens. Here's this altercation. And I think just the challenge of knowing that we have, it's just a challenge of just not enough information available to us right now. And really in real time, you guys are all exploring that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Pastor, I'd like to tack on to that. When I was in the military, there was this running joke that civilians don't understand what goes on in the military, that like that's a different type of PTSD, or the only real PTSD happens in the military. I would like to disprove that. There is definite PTSD that goes on in the hood. There's definite PTSD of a 5-year-old or 6-year-old or whatever age, young age that a child can be, can experience the same type of traumas that I've or another comrade of mine in the military have experienced. Honestly, I've experienced just as much in both worlds. So there's that correlation sometimes that people are just now trying to picture together, that there is some type of real world PTSD back in the States. There's still PTSD that's happening at home. There's 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids that can definitely witness a dead body. There's a 5 or 10-year-old kid that can definitely witness individuals, using and abusing drugs or domestic violence or whatever case may have you. That goes silenced too often because there's not. Imagine a young kid is going to school and is acting out, and they're extremely, disruptive. But that's immediately casted off as, oh, that kid is bored, or that kid it's not. There's no real sense of sitting down and talking to young people and actually understanding what a lot of what young people witness that they can't articulate, nor do they think that anyone really cares to listen to.
Good stuff. Some of the threads you guys are talking about makes me think about some of the medical studies where medicine tends to think men of color, and perhaps Black men in particular, have a higher threshold for pain. So the whole issues with pain management, whether or not pain is managed effectively. And I'm thinking of that same thing where, do we have the right to experience emotions, either in our communities, in our families, the people that know us, or the broader community? Anybody have any thoughts about that? About, I'll say it this way, kind of how society allows us, or not, as men of color to express emotion? Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I that's something I'm continuously grappling with as I walk through the world. I think in some ways, especially men of color, are are not allowed to be seen as unwell because it's not seen as unwell. It's just seen as violent or a problem. There's no desire to investigate what is happening. And so I think that's the hard part, is we're not allowed to be unwell. There's always something else that is labeled to it. But I think on the other part, as you said, that there's just fear to be soft or to express pain. I know for me, my dad just got hip surgery, and it was really hard for me to tell him, like, I'm actually really like nervous about you getting surgery. Like, it was a big deal for me to express, like, I wanted to show him that, like, I'm thinking about you. This is something that is causing an emotional stir in me. And so I think from the out lens, there's that, like, labeling what it is not, but then from the inside, it's just like, how do you finally break past that threshold to be like, okay, I need to express this because it is how you tell someone.
Yeah. No, it does. Go ahead, Corey.
There's a phenomenal movie written and directed by Barry Jenkins, named Moonlight, that definitely expresses how young Black men are kind of like put into situations where very early on we're told not to worry about our emotions or not to really give into our emotions, and that being suppressed for so many years can be compounded into a huge situation that just pretty much implodes on itself. For instance, and if you guys don't mind me being a little bit vulnerable, I didn't cry when my mom first passed. My immediate thought process when I was in high school, junior year, 2010, was immediately survival mode. What do I have to do to make sure I put food in my mouth? Because that person that just passed away was the main source of that. Where do I go to sleep at? Things like that. And then I think maybe 2 years into the military, when I was a year into the military, I was sleeping on my bunk, and the only like photo I have of my mom was an obituary, and that accidentally got washed. And that was the first time I ever cried about my mom's passing, because it was so suppressed and it literally just kind of imploded on itself that it just kind of like made me cry uncontrollably. Yeah. And so situations like that, when I started to understand, like, whoa, this is a huge problem. Why am I not being able to feel these emotions? And it doesn't have to always be sad. I have a therapist, and I talk about times where I do something that's really great, but I don't really care to like really, live in the moment. I just want to move on to the next thing, and so on and so forth. So like birthdays, I don't really have a big thing about birthdays. I don't know about you guys, but I'm cool with just staying at home, eating my favorite meal, some meatloaf or whatever, pizza, and chilling. But there's a person and there's a partner, there's people in your life like, no, you got to go out and do something. You got to do something. And it creates that angst for myself. So it's not always, and also dismantling that fact that emotions, when you're feeling bad, is, bad to express, and you're suppressing your emotions when things are good or bad. Being able to articulate that thing just is a hard thing in the Black community.
Yeah, and I'm laughing a little bit just because I've been thinking about there's a Facebook ad out there for a poster that lists emotions from A to Z, and it looks like there's probably like 60 of them, just different descriptions of different types of emotions. And then you say, here's good, here's bad. I think that even that can be a challenge sometimes, the ability to articulate what is the emotion that I'm experiencing right now. How do I talk about this? What is it? It's welling up in me. But have I been given the tools to articulate what it is? Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, Pastor, when was the last time you got excited?
Last time I got it. Well, I have the benefit of preaching every Sunday. And so at some point in time during that service, I usually get pretty excited. I get excited by watching other people grow. And so there's a blessing in that. But if you talk about getting excited for myself, I don't always do that. I don't always express that. Like, I really did this. This was great. I'm celebrating Walter today because that was an awesome achievement. I don't do that often. When
was the last time you cried?
Now that that happens a lot also. Let me say this though, Corey. I wanna. It happens a lot for me because my position in community. I want to say this right. And thank you for taking over facilitating too. My position as the leader of the faith community, to do it with integrity, demands a level of transparency from me that I probably wouldn't do otherwise. So I want to say it right. It's not like I'm super holy or I'm self-actualized, but I'm just there. You're kind of vulnerable in front of the people, and there's times you got to get that emotion out in order to finish the function. So it's a unique role. Being a pastor has really opened up greatly my emotions. But before that, yeah, I would say not that much. Let's go to Pardeep and then Kevin.
Corey, I just wanted to, you know, as far as this thinking about, hey Corey, I was just thinking about as far as even thinking about, the times you cried or the times and this country is very much draped in sort of Darwinian psychology, and Darwinian psychology is very much white supremacist. You know, you talk to white supremacists, and they'll tell you they cold-heartedly believe in survival of the fittest, and some of that rubs off on everyone, no matter if you like it or not. So sometimes you do take yourself for granted, and you do. And as you were speaking about not celebrating birthdays or just kind of being like, yeah, that's kind of cool. Just let's go out the next day. I got work to do, or whatever you're in. Yeah, sometimes we forget to celebrate ourselves, and yeah, just really thinking about celebrating yourself and coming back to that. And yeah, I think some of that is the healing part of it, is to say, how do we heal? How do we get away from this? I think linearness. How do we engage in creativity? How do we come back to it? And how do we break up some of the stuff that has kind of been affixed to us and who we are? And yeah, I think the older I get, the more that I cry at the drop of a dime. But it usually has to do with somebody else and feeling joy for somebody else, not as much about for myself.
Hey, Pastor, you're on mute.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so when I'm listening to everybody, and thank you for everybody's point of view and experience and all this, I find that for me as a man of color, one of the hardest barriers I've had is overcoming toxic masculinity, because when there's a point in my life where I couldn't share anything, I couldn't express myself, and so I ended up doing things that people, well, I don't know if it's an actual legal term or a doctor's term, but it was toxic. You know, I went the other side because as an Asian guy, at least, we're seen as more feminine and not masculine, or not seen as like a leading role in a movie or anything. So then for me and many other Asian guys, we did the total opposite. We became hyper, and it was not actually really truthful or authentic to ourselves. And so just like Corey was saying, it's like, you know, you don't cry, or you don't get really happy or joyful, you get disconnected. And it's really, to me, I found it was really dangerous because there's this saying, and people have probably heard it, but it's so true because I've lived it, but it's hurt people hurt people. And so there was a lot of times that I was getting the crap beat out of me when I was younger, or being made fun of verbally by other bullies. And because I didn't know how to express it myself, I then too turned into the bully. And so I started doing all of that stuff because people would be like, what's wrong? It's like, nothing. Boom. You know, it's just like you didn't know how to express yourself. You have all this pent up energy. And so that's why I think it gets tough and challenging for men, especially men of color, to do it, because sometimes it can come across as toxic because we've built this in for so long. And I'm not saying it's justified. It's not justified, because I'm a firm believer in, we're not in control of what we think and what our emotions are, but we're in control of what we do after that. And so we have to take responsibility as men and minorities of color, and what we do with that, because that's not right to hurt other people because of that. And I think that's one challenge, is how we express it is a little different. That's what I love about film and TV and art, because it's a great way to express yourself in so many ways. Like I can only speak for myself in the documentary that I did, but to see thousands of Asian guys or women even be like, oh my God, I had that experience too. And it like really healed them in some way, their resentments or their anger or their past life experiences, and see me go through the journey of discovering about Asian masculinity and the history and just trying to get better really helped the community out in a small but big way at the same time. And so I think that's a big thing we need to really acknowledge.
So let me ask this on top of that, continue on this dialogue, kind of a two-part connected question. Growing up, what kind of messages or themes did you get about expressing emotions or not expressing emotions? And then, you know, all of us have obviously are growing in that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on this panel. What changed so that you became more, I'll say, self-aware about the need to tend to your emotions? So growing up, what kind of messages, and then is there something that changed that caused you to do better, if you will? Anybody want to grab that one? Go ahead, Matthew.
I think growing up for me, you know, you get the messages that like you're not supposed to cry, you know, stop being soft. And I think for me, it was like it felt twice as difficult because I was growing up queer as well. So it was people looking at that as just like symptoms of me being queer, and not like me being hurt. And so to sort of like get the attention off of that, or like not have people think I'm an easy target, I just turned to anger. And so like middle school, you know, it just would be like kind of that buildup that we were talking about, like build up, like you hold all that stuff inside and then it lashes out. And you have like 3 examples of really like high intense emotional experiences. And I think the last one that really kind of woke me up that was like, okay, you can't do this, was probably the most mild of them, but like had the most impact was I got into an argument with a friend in class, and ended up calling her a name that men just should not call women. And I didn't see anything wrong with it. I'm like, I'm defending myself, you know, and it really just took, I think, someone sitting me down and be like, I get you feel all that. But as Kevin was saying, like what you don't have the right to do is what you did. And seeing the after effect of like, you know, just the effect of someone you care about, you know, sitting in like the pain you have caused them. I was like, oh, I hate this. I don't feel good. Like it wasn't worth it. And so I've tried to be really conscious of that, not letting myself build up emotion in that way, that if it needs to be released, it needs to be released. And I need to take responsibility for releasing that. And if I feel myself getting that way, then I need to like remove myself from the situation to avoid causing people harm in that way.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Matthew. Others, Corey? Go ahead, Corey. Corey and then Pardeep, Kevin, and then Doc.
I think it gets to a turning point in all young men's lives where it's like, okay, I want to get my things together, whether it's like with a woman or with your like realizing your friends are growing up or whatever the case may be. It's just like, man, like the bar, I'm right here and I see all my other friends and colleagues are up here emotionally. To be very honest, I just really want to be like a Swiss Army knife as a dad. I want to be able to handle all things. When my child is upset, I want to know how to handle it. When my child is happy, I want to be able to know how to embrace it, so on and so forth. And I want to be not only good at math, but I also want to be able to, you know, hold my child when they're crying and know what to exactly say. And I want to do that for myself. And then I want to do that for my partner, and then want to do that for my immediate family, and then my extended family. So honestly, that's what this is all boiled down to. And also, I want to be happy outside of just playing Monopoly or watching a sports game. I want to be able to be excited about other things and things like that, and feel it very genuinely, and being able to articulate it as such.
Appreciate that. Let's go to Pardeep.
Yeah, growing up, you know, we moved here when I was 6 years old, and well, growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and not having a lot of people that I guess understood culture and understood who you were, what culture. There was a lot of just questions. What's what?
What are you?
How do you say your name? What are you? And so I think some of those things, as you're growing up, they reinforce your lack of power and the lack of power that you already might feel because you're in this place and you don't know it and you don't speak the language like everyone else does. And so your mom and dad dress differently. I just remember having that sort of in my spiritual psyche growing up. And when you do, sometimes the nearest person, and I think this is true for, and I'm going to generalize a little bit here, but a lot of boys look at their fathers and say, okay, once I can defeat you, or once I can beat you up, or once I can do something, like then I'll be powerful, because that's the most proximal sort of masculine figure that you have near you. And you're like, okay, that's power. And once I can defeat him. And so a lot of people, and it's within entertainment, there's lots of entertainment that just kind of talks about the boy becoming a man and being stronger than his father. And what you discover is that actually power was not about physically beating anybody, not your father, not society. Power was really about freedom, the freedom to be yourself and who you were meant to be. So, and as far as Matthew and Kevin and Corey and Dr. McKee, we all talked about the sense of like as you grow older, you have to come back to that sense and say, you know what, I have to regain power. And what does that look like? And oftentimes it looks like a mixture of being vulnerable, of forgiveness, of embracement, of all of these things, and maybe even redefining what does healthy masculinity look like as we go forward.
So I could beat my dad up when I was in
Kevin?
grade. So I could beat my dad up in third grade, and I still didn't.
I froze for a minute.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it's me.
Okay. So I had to figure out pretty quickly that wasn't the case for me. Growing up, I was in a different case than probably some of you, but it probably happens to some people. But I was often marginalized a lot by people around me, my peers, my parents. My parents were hippies, and they were white people from the 60s. They were all about free love and expression. I would express it. And every time I would try to share about how I would get bullied, being called a chink, and hated the fact that people could get away with calling me a chink in anywhere, and it wasn't considered racist. Yet the intention was very racist and hurtful. And people would just go along and be like, well, it's not as bad as black people. And I'm like, well, okay, that's racist. And you're telling me I can't feel a certain way because somebody else has it worse. I wasn't saying I had it worse than somebody else. It was like, so I suffered through that most of my life. So I shut down. I shut down a lot, mostly in high school, because, I went to a very white high school, and it was just all about, trying to be the funniest person. But then I tried to mention, like I can't go to the junior prom. Well, why don't you just ask that Asian girl out? Well, she turned me down and said, I don't date Asian guys. And then it's like, then I would just say like, that's kind of fucked up. And it's like, same thing. Well, it's not that big of a deal, Kevin. It's not a problem. And it's like, no, it's the fact that it's like a racial discrimination. That's the problem. And I didn't know how to articulate it back then. I mean, I was in high school, I was in grade school. So that was also just part of my growing up. But I think my biggest challenge growing up was just feeling marginalized, not being able to even share about it because I didn't have somebody else to even say like, hey, you know what? I did that too. Like I went through all of that stuff, and this is what we can do going forward. And so if I would have had that role model or that mentor or somebody who really got it, and understood it, like, Dr. Kazee said earlier, it's like, culturally, everything's different. And so I had a lot of people from different cultures tell me, oh no, it's not a problem. It's all, you the Kevin thing, you got to fix that on yourself, which, there's some truth to that too. There's a little bit of truth. However, the other truth was I was totally feeling like I made this shit up in my head. Or why would I ever tell myself or express anything to you if you're just going to shut me down like that right away? And it was a really big I went growing up.
I originally grew up in India, but I had a fair share of mental health problems in my family. So I could see firsthand how it impacts the family, the struggles, the chaos that can happen in the family because of mental illness. And for me, growing up, we kind of talked about it, but not to the extent that I fully understood what it was. And then when I moved to this country is when um, it sort of hit me how you interact with people, how you express your emotions. And as a psychiatrist, I have to say it has helped me tremendously grow as a person, actually, because I got to be aware of myself about my own sort of reactions, my own countertransference, as I call it. Like, I see somebody with a certain problem, there's this sense of frustration, there's a sense of irritability. And it's amazing how the growing up years, the formation years has an impact on you and how your emotional reactivity gets affected by that. Because you tend to react based on your upbringing and your background. And I had to catch myself so many times that, this is not how you should react. So I always say that my 20-year-old is quite different from my 45-year-old, 40-year-old. So I have learned, I mean, in this profession, particularly as a psychiatrist, dealing with emotions, dealing with behavior, has helped me so much understand how you yourself have to navigate through these difficulties. And it has an impact how you interact with other people around us. So as we are talking about how other people interact with us, but I think as men of color, we also have to recognize how we interact with each other. Because I think the way we interact, we have our own biases, our own emotional reactivity, and how we interact with each other may sometimes be not all that helpful. So I think we have to, incorporate in our thinking how we understand our emotional problems and then how we relate and how we transform that message with other people around us so that we can be more helpful and can be more understanding.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Thank you, Dr. McHugh, for that point. Especially that when we're in relationship with each other, I think one of the best times of my life still to this day was being a part of the Intersectionality Among Men project at Diverse and Resilient. And that's a community leadership HIV prevention project for Black, queer, same-gender loving men in Milwaukee. And I think it was one of those things that it was my first time being in regular community with other men, like on a weekly basis. And so there was a lot of learning about being in healthy relationship with each other. And when conflict arising, not letting it, whatever people brought to the space, blow up so that we could not be in community with each other. I think especially being Black, queer, and men of color who are queer, in certain times you are not allowed to, I think, be seen as just, not that you are just, but you are not allowed access to the spaces of Black, heterosexual, cisgender men. And so I think that forming of community is different. I think the way that your emotional well-being is seen is different. And so there was some deficit that we all brought to the space in trying to be in community with each other. And I think mental health is a huge problem, especially in such a segregated community in Milwaukee. So being together, we had several conversations about what it meant to talk to each other with respect, to see each other, to ask each other, are you okay? To check in with each other. What does it mean to build it? And I just think that was new. And as much as I'm grateful that experience, I sometimes hate that it is still a process to learn how to be in community with one another. I just wanted to add that there.
Yeah, I think that's very rich. Uh, Being in community with one another, healing in community, growing in community. I say again with my pastoral hat, that has been one of the most humbling and gratifying things to watch is how communities grow together over time in love and sharing and caring. It's a very powerful piece of the puzzle. So thinking of community, what about resources, guys? What kind of resources have you either accessed or recommended that have helped you or helped others on the journey? Mental health resources. Corey, I see your. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So resources that I was able to obtain. Honestly, I didn't receive many resources. I have my job, which is a full-time job that allows me to be able to have a therapy session and pay for it. My job pays for it, and they also take care of all co-pays at Leaders Igniting Transformation. However, there's immense amount of more people that need it way more than me. And so while we were on this, or while we're in this talk, that program I was telling you all about, Black Space, the therapist that's leading that also has told me that Kreider and many other agencies and things like that are definitely interested in it. And it looks like this might be a thing that allows many hundreds of other Black and brown youth in the city, specifically Black, to be able to get more more attention and more or less that resource for them to be able to sit down and talk. But to be very, very honest, outside the military, I was afraid to talk to someone when I was there because everything was going to be reported back to command. But outside of that, I didn't know of many resources as a youth growing up here.
Yeah, just wanted to echo as far as just grateful to Milwaukee Film Freighter for putting this on, and I think just thinking about resources, NAMI is a great resource. There's a couple other organizations that do a lot of work as far as providing access, but we have to be honest that with this there is a shortage of clinicians of color. There are a shortage of psychiatric Black psychiatrists who work with children. There's a shortage of that. We have a severe shortage of really accessible mental health, and I think going forward we really need to invest in building that infrastructure and even the resources that do exist. Corey was talking a little bit about just as far as military care and the VA. I don't know how many clients I've had come from the VA and want private practice because they didn't feel like it had the culture where they could open up and talk about some of the deep trauma. And so I think there's just there's a shortage of all of that. And even if there is a system that's set up, I think Aurora right now, Advocate Aurora is doing a great job of trying to implement and encourage and nurture that. I think I think all of the services that do exist need to just do a better job of reevaluating and really being out in the community and saying, okay, this is what we're here for.
Thank you, Pardeep. Appreciate that. Other comments on resources?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, I was going to say, besides doctors and everything, I've been sober for almost 5 years. For me, 12-step programs have really helped me a lot in my life. I think it has a sense of community. It has a sense of purpose. It has actual steps that you can do to actually get better in certain ways. Obviously, it might not work for everybody. The great part is it's free. So I don't know. It's just, for me, I just find that they tend to be very valuable. I know for me too as well, I've tapped into a little bit more of Buddhism and the philosophies of that. That's helped me a lot. And so there's all types of resources out there that I find besides just doctors and therapy and stuff. So those are alternatives.
Appreciate you. Doctor?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think the resources are more unique to each area. Some communities have a lot more resources. Some communities are limited. So at least at Rogers, we've tried our best to lay out all the available support and help that you have in our community here in Wisconsin. And yeah, it all depends on the kind of problems you have. Right now, we are not at a stage that we can have a unique or a subset of treatment just available for men of color. But eventually, we may reach a stage as we evolve in our mental health treatment that we should be able to develop a specialized core treatment specifically meant for that subset of people. But right now, we don't have that. So what we have is general resources for treatment. I agree, doing AA meetings, NA meetings, NAMI, reputable website is what I always recommend, like American Psychiatric Association or American Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, where you have some more enriched information about this kind of resources you can tap into. Because we live in an era of social media where, you have so much information out there. Some information is helpful, but there's a lot of misinformation also. So I always tell people that not all treatments are equal and not all discussions are helpful. So we got to recognize and get to the source that provides us the best help and support.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Matthew, resources that you have utilized or shared that are beneficial.
I think to echo Pardeep earlier, like therapists, counselors, practitioners of color are so important. I think while I utilized therapy, I was really fortunate to have a therapist of color. So I felt like a lot of the things I was able to just start talking about the issues that were affecting me. I didn't have to do any educating. And that was just such a great experience for me. I also appreciated that the therapist that I saw really was preparing me for like the fact that like therapy was not going to be forever. So like, here's some things that when this is done, we take this and like you can use tools that you can keep using. And I think there was also good encouragement to be in group spaces. So like I mentioned, I think in the last question, intersectionality among men. I think not dealing with problems in isolation and instead dealing among them with men who share my identity was just super helpful. And I think for the men in the program, it's increasingly helpful. Just not to know that you're not alone, to know that you can come someplace and be seen and just talk the way you talk. I think less traditional methods of like people just doing events that bring people together. They kind of provide a framework to think through emotional well-being. So I think for me, like Embody Yoga has done a lot of that through like intentional exercises, or just people like putting together community conversations. I just think those have been some of the best resources to kind of break the ice for people to start thinking about what it is that they will need to start engaging in their emotional well-being.
Excellent. So we are going to appreciate all of you. We're going to get ready to wrap up. I'm going to give each one of you, just if you have a last thing that you want to share, anything you drew from this, anything you'd like to emphasize. Let's start with Dr. McKeith. Anything any last point you want to raise?
I think this was a really rich discussion, and I really want us to, hopefully people can learn and this discussion can open up a thought process for change. I think that's what I would emphasize is look for change and be safe and healthy is what I would say.
Excellent. Appreciate you. Let's go to Kevin next.
I think we all know people who could use mental health. And I think the best thing for us to do and people to do is to help themselves first. So when the person reaches out, you can help them as well. So I think that's kind of just focusing on yourself and helping yourself so you can be there for others. So that's my big thing.
Excellent. Matthew?
Thank you everyone for this, to be a part of this conversation. I really appreciate everyone's insight. I think I just have two things. That one, emotional well-being doesn't operate on a binary. So like there's no super key for men to reach emotional well-being. I just think that it's overcoming that stigma and really trusting the fact that like you deserve to be well. You should, you want to be well, and like your gender shouldn't define how you reach wellness. And I think too would just be to like be easy with the fact that it's a process. And I think I entered the conversation with like it's a non-linear process. It's a process. You can tag in and out of it, and that's okay. It's about finding your people, finding your space to do the processing in.
Thank you, Matthew. Pradeep.
Yeah, I think I want to thank everyone for and Pastor Lanier, you did a great job moderating. I mean, this was a really rich discussion around just around mental health and men's mental health. I think just come back to where we started from, really just having the courage to and when I say courage, having not just individual courage, but systemic courage to change a society, to look at mental health differently, to address what is going into our psyches and our spirits. What are we inundated with? What do we think? I mean, and just reassessing what we have been taught and conditioned, and how we're gonna take those lessons learned and impart with the next generation so that they can go forward. And then just not be saddled by some of the stuff that we had to be saddled with.
All right. Well, excellent, everybody. This was a privilege and an honor for me to be with all of you and to share and to learn in community. And I look forward to seeing what else flows out of this. I know this will not be our last opportunity to build together. So you all be safe and be well, and everybody take care.
Thank you.
The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. Just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF